Wednesday edition. Welcome back. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Andrew Basiago is with us. Tomorrow night is Fader Night. Rock and Rule Trivia. Bring your A game. Andrew, it's here. The campaign is kicked off. And so how's it going for you? Let's start there.
Well, my campaign is undeclared. I have not officially filed with the FEC yet. I will be soon. I will be declaring in the fall. The thrust of my activities thus far, as my over 3,000 supporters on Facebook know, has been providing the American electorate what it deserves, which is substance. I've been focusing on content. I've isolated about 100 positions that make me far more than the time travel candidate. I mean, my view of it is that my background time traveling as a child and going to Mars for the country as a college student is just part of the color of my past. In the same way that, let's say, winning the revolution was for George Washington or the charge up San Juan Hill was for TR. I'm not running as the time travel candidate. I'm not even running as the teleportation candidate, although I have pledged to essentially implement the infrastructure of the future that began in Tesla's imagination by making implementation of the Tesla teleportation technology that we developed 45 years ago a major part of my campaign. Because let's face it, one of the greatest contributions that American presidents have made to our society have been technical revolutions. And I would cite Lincoln's founding of the land-grant college system, which greatly developed our agricultural output and productivity. President Eisenhower's federal highway system, which was originally done for defense purposes. And also President Kennedy's space initiative had some of the most long-lasting impacts on the country. So I do want to be the American president that implements Tesla teleportation, which I already know defines the future. But I haven't declared. I've waited for others as they've entered the race basically a year in advance of when they should be, and when it's even polite to enter the race. I'll give you a couple examples. Ronald Reagan declared in November of 1979, and William Clinton declared in October of 1991. It's been a tradition not to electioneer for more than a year before the election. So I'm going to declare in the fall within a year of the election. But meanwhile, I've been addressing the direction I think the country should take, and I've been widely supported in that public policy discussion. The task is going to be communicating those positions to the mass public when I enter in the fall. So my team has already begun scripting a set of YouTubes in which I'm going to discuss my policy initiatives as president. I'm going to discuss some of my past experiences and how they've readied me for the presidency. But quite honestly, I've been very offended by those who have already entered the race, not the least of whom is Ted Cruz, who has even stolen my motto, A Time for Truth. I selected that slogan, that motto for my campaign, because it's a double entendre. I'm asserting that it's a time for truth, for new transparency and openness in government. But it also refers to my background, time traveling for the country, and then as a leading figure in the truth movement. It has personal meaning. So what have we seen? We've seen one of the most highly touted Republican candidates stealing my motto. How Republican of him. So I've seen that happen. Now I've seen this boomlet over Donald Trump. I can tell you this, I can tell you why, and that is Donald Trump is never going to be president of the United States.
When it was first disclosed to you about Barack and yourself back,
right, in 1980,
was there any mention of Donald Trump back then?
No, his name never came up, and quite frankly, after Nixon, it's been impossible for the American people to select an active negative personality. I'll just cite one factor. In the greatest depression since the Great Depression, as framed by the great futurist Gerald Celente, we've been living through here since 2007 or so, the greatest depression, at least since the Great Depression.
Right.
Donald Trump had a nationally syndicated television show in which on camera, he fired people, which was the most heartless, the most predatory, the most pernicious thing to do to discourage the American people at the very time that record high numbers of people were facing unemployment. That alone disqualifies him for ever being president. Look at the kind of leadership we got during the Great Depression. We got Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When one of my followers told me that my truth campaign about time travel on Mars was pure Americana, was the country was about, that it was what the country was about, and he knew because his late mother had been a friend of FDR and had convalesced with FDR in the swimming pool after he developed polio, I cried. Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt set the standard of what it means to be president of the United States in the same way that Abraham Lincoln did. And I'm offended that this billionaire, I don't care if he has $9 billion. If somebody has $9 billion, I'm going to assume that they learned the art of sharp business practices. That's what I'm going to assume, that they learned the art of calculated selfishness, because that's what it takes to develop that kind of fortune. But beyond that, even if he was a marvelously innovative corporate leader, whatever, involved in benevolent technical development, the bottom line is that this is a man who went before the American people when we were in the greatest depression since the Great Depression and created a catchphrase around firing people in a brutal, condescending way. I don't believe that's an America I don't believe that that's a candidate that the American people are going to make their president. I have too much faith in the American people to presume that will occur. Well, and his name never came up as a future president.
The same appeal for yourself, for the American public, is that you're not a career politician, and
right.
Neither is he. And it's like, for the first time that I can remember, the same comparisons keep coming up with Reagan, but no, Reagan was governor for a long time of one of the most powerful states in the Union, so he certainly
right.
had his experience as a politician. Whether he was
right.
an actor or not has nothing really to come into play there. I think it's a wrong comparison, but Trump comes along, love him or hate the guy, he's not a career politician. And that,
correct,
for the first time, so we have an actual choice of somebody that is not a politician and wants just, his platform is to make America great again. And I can see that appeal for everybody, but your platform is not to mince words here, is very similar to the Donalds in that you want to make America great again. And you're not
yes.
a career politician.
Well, there's some things in common. We're both iconoclasts. He's very rich. I'm a poor country lawyer from Washington State.
Sure.
We're both outspoken. We both believe in the country and in the country not being pushed around. I think it's safe to say that even though his immigration comments had a negative inflection directed towards Mexican Americans, that we both recognize that just as we did after the period of immigration from 1880 to 1924, we need to have a moratorium on legal and illegal immigration, at least for a period of years, to allow the 70 million foreign nationals who have become American citizens legally and illegally over the past 25 years to be assimilated. So we probably have ultimately a pretty similar view of immigration, although I see a lot more virtue in the Mexican American population than he does. I think his comments were very bigoted. Right. I believe in the Mexican American community because I've worked with it, and I know those people. And I used to go into Mexico with my dad as a youngster, and I believe in the decency and the hard work and the family values of the Mexican people there and those who have come here. So I think his real point, I'll cut him some slack here, I think his real point was we need a moratorium on immigration to deal with its effects, with its externalities, and I agree. I think it's also true that we probably believe that the country is a can-do country, but the difference is I'm pointing in a given direction. I'm saying we should recapture the teleportation technology that was one of the great technical feats of our father's generation. He's just saying he believes in the country. So in other words, I'm offering a plan, he's offering platitudes. But it is interesting, and that is that in addition, I think, to Kathy Fiorini, the former or present chairwoman of Hewlett-Packard, of the 50 or so Americans who are named on the tote board at Paddy Power's, which is at paddypower.com in Dublin, Ireland, the betting, I think that Donald and I are the only individuals who have never held public office, and we are now both at 50 to 1 odds, where in fact we're next to each other in the list. He was previously at 100 to 1 odds back in March, but I just checked the tote board again here in July, and we're both at 50 to 1. And I'm very proud of the fact, as he would be, that despite the fact that I haven't even declared yet, I've made the tote board at Paddy Power. So there's, some of the smart money is betting on me, and that must be demonstrative of a larger breakout that can occur in the fall when I officially declare.
I've said it many times, Andy. I could, if I ran for president, I could probably win. If I just went on a couple of basic platforms, one of them, and it's just so obvious to me why all these career politicians, if they really want to get elected, they would only have to focus on one thing, and that is what you mentioned earlier. To me, the infrastructure, schools, employment, all those three things can all be fixed by supporting each other. In other words, just a fraction of our in the healthcare system, a fraction of our defense budget, pull out a chunk of that money, increase taxes on the 1%, and the next thing you know, you've got $1 trillion sitting in front of you of excess cash that would employ everybody in this country that is unemployed, build a new school next to every other school in the United States, college on down to elementary and preschool. Everything could be doubled in size, double teacher salaries, employ everybody, and pay for the health care. And it just all in one pot. Done.
Right. You just basically described a large part of my domestic platform. But let me say that, look, President Eisenhower was right when he warned us about the military-industrial complex. We really should go back and read that farewell address for everything he said, not just that phrase. We are now spending 59% of the federal budget on defense. Our defense budget is larger than all of the other countries in the world combined.
Yes.
How could we not have already beaten them? Is it not the case that if we were to ask the experts, we now have the technology to knock down anything that's thrown at us through the air, and yet we're not even worrying sometimes where, let's say, a nuclear weapon could be driven into the country. Okay, and I don't want to discuss that on the air, but I have some information about an actual threat to the country that I want to check as president. I don't want to describe what it is because it's a lethal threat. But what I'm saying is it should be clear to anybody that we are spending the lion's share of our wealth on defense. And the difference between a tank and a school teacher is the tank just sits there unless you have a war. And then you fire it to kill some people or break buildings. But a teacher, it trains and inspires tens of thousands of students during his or her career to build the country into something beyond a maker of tanks. In a world in which military investment isn't a very good investment vehicle, in a world in which more money is being made by making movies than making bombs. Okay, so I think it should be apparent, it should be a matter of bipartisan support that we are not going to restore the American economy until we address the fact that we're doing too much defense spending. Now, the figure I've given just arbitrarily is cut it in half. Maybe it should be just in a third or cut 25% out and engage in the kind of spending you're talking about. I absolutely agree, but let me tell you what I think actually is the bellwether issue. I sent my campaign manager, Duke Brickhouse, and two other people to Contact in the Desert this year, that gathering out in Palm Springs, out in Joshua Tree in California, which I think it's clear to say is a leading venue of the cultural creative niche within the society. One of the reasons I'm playing the long game on the presidency, and I will either win in 2016 or 2020 or 2024, is my appeal is to the cultural creatives, and the cultural creative niche will become the dominant niche in the country. We already know the reasons why that's going to occur. The number one issue on the cultural creatives, as represented by the 2,000 attendees at this year's Contact in the Desert, was the fact that the U.S. government is hiding benevolent technologies, and this is causing the regression of American society. So the basic purpose of my truth campaign regarding teleportation has been sort of on the cutting edge of the cultural creatives' concerns. So I think more than just rampant defense spending, there is an issue here that's not really being reported by Fox News and the other kind of either right-leaning or conventional major news types of shows and networks. And that is that a large group of Americans know, as I have been describing publicly for the last 10 years, that our government is sitting on technology that the United States could use to produce prosperity at home, American technical leadership abroad, and end this recession, and is not doing so. We even have a president who got reelected clearly as a harbinger of the breakaway civilization, because Obama is still lying about not being about the fact that he was part of the Mars Jumper program. In other words, we have a president who was involved in the secret space program, who pledged unprecedented transparency as president, but who then didn't come through and end the Mars Coverup, as I've tried to do as a civilian. And this indeed is one of the reasons why I'm seeking the presidency, is we have to end the truth embargo, and we have to begin telling the truth to the American people. So I'm running not under the banner of time travel, not under the banner of teleportation. I'm running under the banner of truth. And among those things includes, for example, the sequestration of this advanced transportation technology, this advanced remote viewing technology, the space technology. You know, Ben Rich of Lockheed, before he died several years before his death, he said, if you're wondering about what we can do, anything you can imagine we've already achieved. And this is a direct quote. We now have the technology to take ET home. That's from the former CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works.
Right.
Okay. So the public knows this now. The public knows that we achieve excellence as individuals and generally as a society. We have many brilliant and talented musicians and filmmakers and writers and artists and school teachers and professors and business people. We are a very dynamic society. What the public knows is that the U.S. government is falling down and is a mediocre enterprise, and that one of its greatest mistakes has been the sequestration of the future itself by concealing these hidden technologies. And they know that my public work has embodied the fight against that secrecy. I've often said that the analogy between the truth movement and the abolition movement is that the abolition movement sought to end the physical oppression of slavery, whereas as a modern abolition movement, in a way, the truth movement has tried to end the metaphysical oppression of secrecy. And I hope in the future I might be regarded someday as maybe the Frederick Douglass of that effort, in the sense that I stood up and I agitated, and I agitated, and I agitated, as Frederick Douglass had once advised a young man to do, to end dishonor and oppression and injustice. And this is what I think characterizes the modern U.S. government. Everybody knows that we're still living under the secrecy regime that was created during the Cold War. We won the Cold War. Everybody knows that we should be friends and allies with the Russians rather than waging a proxy war against them through the Ukraine. I vowed to have, an Andrew Vladimir friendship with Mr. Putin should I become president. But the bottom line is the country knows that our government is not acting as great as the net potential of themselves, of the American people themselves. And a major aspect of that is the way in which secrecy is being abused to hide technologies which should have been released decades ago, for example, to end cancer as a dread disease. The government has virtually acknowledged that it's keeping cancer cures back on the request of the American Medical Association. Now, here in that climate where the country wants to have a president that will speak up to the banksters and to the career bureaucrats keeping the secrets, we have one of the leading billionaires, one of the leading tycoons, the J.P. Morgan of our time, in the form of Donald Trump running and believing he can win. That's just part of the delusion that some of these fat cat candidates have. They're not going to win. I view Trump, quite frankly, remember that old thing that Bucky Fuller used to talk about, how the Titanic and ships like it became big right before ships became very small? Yeah, he called it the mammoth peak magnitude, I think, of technical development.
That's right.
That's what I think. That's what I think Trump is in the world of politics and culture. He's like the biggest a-hole in the country until his bubble is popped and everybody recognizes that this is a billionaire. This is the J.P. Morgan of our time, and we're not going to make him our leader. He would be terrible in terms of the way he would be received, for example, as the principal ambassador for the country overseas. We don't need one of our leading plutocrats addressing everything but, let's say, the inequality between the rich and the poor in the country. I mean, I knew the late Rick Hayden of Portland, Oregon, who was, at least on paper, worth almost $1 billion. And in 2008, Rick sat me down at his dining room table in Lake Oswego, Oregon, and said, Andy, I want you to find me $1 billion. And I said, why? And he goes, I want to take $1 billion and buy foreclosed properties and let private mortgages, white hat mortgages, to people whose credit scores have been utterly devastated in this recession, who will never own their own home or a townhouse or condominium again. And I said, well, Rick, why is it even necessary? And he said, as somebody who was approaching $1 billion in wealth, he said, because I can tell you, as you know, Rick was educated at Yale and Columbia Law School. He said, money is in too few hands in this country. Now, how is electing one of the leading billionaires in the country ever going to correct that? When I had a private discussion with a centimillionaire about the fact that that's really where even some of the wealthy know that we're at. We're like a great engine that is unprimed because too few people have any cash. That defines a depression. That occurs as a result of natural economic cycles where waves of technical development top out, and you have the failure of enterprises, then you have unemployment, then you have a lower consumer base, and ultimately affects the credit cycles in the society. That's where we've been at since Barack Obama got elected, and we have not been addressing the economic peril that the American people are in. That's what I plan to do.
What about disclosure?
Well, disclosure is always happening, but I've stated what I will do, which is I will disclose any information that the United States has, the United States government is holding, that the disclosure of which will not either create a clear and present danger. I would never, for example, disclose how to build an atomic weapon. If you go back to the old, U.S. v. Knoll decision regarding Erwin Knoll's plan at the Progressive magazine to publish how to build an atomic bomb, and also that would harm or compromise personal or group privacy. For example, the privacy of an individual, a company, or a church, or something like that. Let's say the information gathered during an FBI investigation of somebody who was later cleared of wrongdoing. But beyond that, I believe the American people have the right to know everything. They have the right to know, for example, whether the Pentagon has determined that there's a 50% chance that we'll have a global coastal flooding event in our lifetime. They have the right to know that we're being visited by perhaps even as many as 57 different extraterrestrial species, and that among the 4 species that are visiting us frequently are the tall grays, the short grays, the reptilians, and the Nordics. As was taught to me in Project Pegasus as a child brought within a special access program in the early 70s, and as was also briefed to the Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, who was then in the early 70s the Defense Minister of Canada. So I would have absolute transparency on the extraterrestrial question. I believe the public has a right to know specifically what technologies the government is keeping secret. But do you know that the U.S. government is keeping secret math patents?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah. So here we have a situation where the patent was developed as a public disclosure that would release the information to the public with the caveat that the patent holder's rights were protected for 17 years. Now, Thomas Jefferson pushed for that inclusion in I think it's in Article 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution, and Benjamin Franklin called a patent the disgrace of a free people. he believed in immediate societal disbursement or dissemination of technology. But I think Jefferson was wise in sponsoring the patent clause because it does allow a creative person or group to make the investment, the internalized investment in technical development, and then profit from it financially for a limited period of time until it's released generally in society. Okay, so after developing the patent system, as a result of the Cold War, the U.S. government then began making some patents secret. So there are both devices and even mathematical formulae for which secret patents have been given. So I guess my point here is that the government, the permanent secret government, based on the doctrine of secrecy, that other countries and the American people themselves cannot be trusted with the truth, goes against our very mores as a society. It was a pathological development connected to the Cold War and the development of the CIA after World War II.
Hey,
I think Truman himself questioned the logic of founding the CIA and regretted that he had.
Hey, Andy, really quick, you want to hang on for a few extra minutes?
You got it.
Okay, we're off the network in a minute and a half, so I'm going to announce right now and read a text race. Maybe he's listening right now. We're going to go ahead and run over. Everybody has been asking for this in Twitter. So screw it. I run this show tonight. I run this show every night. We're just going to keep on going. Normally, I would be running a commercial right now. We'd end at 10 o'clock. Screw it. We're going long. Andy 2016. Okay. All right. That's it. I made the announcement. We'll hang on for an extra 5 minutes. I'm not ready to wind this down yet. Okay. All right, so it's the first time I've ever done this. I hope the network doesn't get upset. And I know that they have programming after us. They can cut us off at 10 o'clock or they can bump the other program, whatever. We're going to keep going.
Right.
Let's go long. Okay, now, what I mean about disclosure, I mean, we're talking about the same thing. But, I mean, are you prepared to deal with the press when they come at you and they are going to ask you this very thing? And we all know what happened to Kucinich and anybody else that has ever been addressing the UFO disclosure idea, ramping up into a campaign, ridicule, jokes, everything happens. So are you prepared for that? And you need to look straight into the camera and say directly, yes, when I become president, the extraterrestrial question is going to be answered. Are you ready?
Right. Well, look at what even the Democrats, how they responded when that question was asked. Dennis Kucinich apologetically talked about his sighting, despite the fact that Presidents Carter and Reagan reported their sightings. President Carter to I think to MUFON or APRO, or one of the major UFO organizations. President Reagan spoke at length about seeing an ET craft off of the wing of his airliner when he was governor of California.
That was one.
So,
he had more than one, but you also had Gerald Ford too as well when he was governor of Michigan.
Right, and so when the candidates were asked in 2008. Dennis Kucinich, he's a very noble man. I've met Dennis. He's a wonderful human being. But I must say that he gave somewhat of an equivocating, apologetic answer, sort of like, you may not want to believe this or not. So he didn't really come out boldly in defense of his experience. Barack Obama made a joke of it. He said, I think the more important question is whether they're Democrats and Republicans. And then he made a completely abstruse point about what really matters is that we have human beings down here on Earth. Well, nobody is saying that just as a result of acknowledging the fact that we're being visited by beings from elsewhere, that we ignore, child hunger, poverty, racism, warfare, and so forth. So those are separate issues. One doesn't exclude, addressing one doesn't involve excluding the other, and that was Obama's stated position, implied that. Okay, I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say, look, in 1952, 9 extraterrestrial craft were seen by hundreds of trained observers above our nation's capital. Langley Air Force Base, the very Air Force Base protecting the CIA headquarters in Langley, and the Capitol itself, clocked those craft at traveling at a speed that was then unattainable, 7,000 miles per hour. Several months later, my father was approached at his job site, working for Okanite Company in Paramus, New Jersey, and ordered to Curtiss Wright in Woodridge, New Jersey, to design the metal alloy by which the ramjet jet would be built. Why did my dad have to design a metal alloy? Because the ramjet was expected to travel at supersonic speeds and come into contact and produce friction with molecules of air in our atmosphere and molecules of space dust outside our atmosphere. So my dear old dad his team developed a metal alloy to prevent the ramjet planes from melting in flight. Why were we going to need supersonic speeds, and why was he contacted 2 months after the famous July 1952 overflight? Because it was expected that the ramjet would be used to chase extraterrestrial craft away from our planet and the near-Earth environment. How long was that ago? 63 years. I am now in my 50s, and my father was called onto that project when he was 29 years old, and he was already 38 when I was born. We're talking about a multi-generational cover-up of the modern UFO phenomenon. And so I do not want to equivocate. I want to tell you, I don't just believe we're being visited. I know we're being visited. Not only do I have the truth embodied in my dad's experience working on the Air Force's response to the ET presence, we have my own contact experiences while working on a classified defense project, Project Pegasus, for DARPA. And I want the American people to know, the American people who in greater numbers acknowledged in an ABC Roper poll that they believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials and voted for George W. Bush for president in 2000, that I will be your truth president. I'm not going to equivocate. I'm not going to maintain this societal sarcasm that takes this natural phenomenon and distorts it into something involving fear and ridicule. That was the negative legacy of the Robertson panel, specifically the Durant report to the 1953 Robertson panel, in which the CIA decided that anybody who reports contact with extraterrestrials should be debunked and subjected to public smear campaigns involving fear and ridicule. It's time to come out of the dark ages and grow up cosmically and acknowledge that not only are we being visited, but our father's generation was working on the defense response to the extraterrestrial presence, and the presence itself is eons old. It goes back to antiquity. And this, just like the animals that live in the ocean, this is a matter of natural history that we should be educating our school children about, not just small cadre of defense officials and school children in special access programs. This is part of the world we live in. We live in a populated universe, and we have to stop snickering at anybody who makes a claim that they've seen or interacted with an extraterrestrial. That would be something in the nature of my response.
What about Jade Helm? As president, would you allow something like that to happen?
No, I'm offended. I'm offended that a country that was born in the spirit of liberty, that has nitpicked legal issues to protect human freedom, that has had something as advanced as the Equal Protection Clause, making sure that no discrete group of Americans becomes a suspect class, would allow our transformation into a totalitarian police state. I'm offended that Jade Helm was even conceived of in the land of liberty. The notion that they would be rehearsing the implementation of martial law within the United States is highly offensive to me, and I will do everything in my power as president to dismantle the police state.
Why do you think there's silence from the White House on Jade Helm? They're not addressing what is going on in the media, and it's been covered in the mass media too, and the conspiracy side of things. But they don't. When you have a loud voice, literally and figuratively, like Alex Jones, and speaking about this, they haven't addressed it at all. Why do you think that is?
Either because the president's been compromised, and his presidency is being managed by perhaps even a military panel, at least in these areas, or his principal conception of of winning the presidency was to be the first black president and not really to be a great president. You know, I had contact with Barry and the woman who in all likelihood was his adoptive mother, namely Stanley Ann Dunham, who's been falsely identified as his biological mother. I believe she was just his handler for the CIA in the nature of an adoptive mother. I know that British intelligence found that they are not related. They actually took biological samples from the glass that he had used during a state visit to England, and he was found not to be the biological son of Stanley Ann Dunham. He doesn't have any British genes. But when I was interacting with them in summer of 80, Stanley Ann was frequently commenting at dinners about how he was going to be the first African-American president. I don't believe he's African-American. I believe that he's a dark-skinned Indonesian. I believe that he's the son of the founder of the Subud faction of Islam, namely a man by the name of Muhammad Subud Sumiwadi Hajojo. Well, that's a whole other story, far too involved to discuss tonight. But I think that if it's not a matter of being compromised and told what to do and what not to do, then I think that the real issue is that Obama has had a conception of himself from a young age that he would be the first black president, and he's being excessively cautious about leading authentically. I don't have those hang-ups. I mean, I'm not going to hang my hat on the fact that I'd be the first, the second Catholic president, or somebody raised as a Catholic in the way that Kennedy was. I was raised as a Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but that I'll be the first, Polish or Catholic president. I'm running. My conception of myself is that I'm running as the truth president. I'm running to become the truth president, which is a cause that transcends myself. I'm not sure that in the psyche of Barack Obama, when the psychohistories are written, that he'll have been found to have transcended his self-concept as the first black president. And by that I mean I think he's been trying to please everybody. So when the military people and the Pentagon planners have said, look, Mr. President, we calculate that there's a 25% chance that if we have the 30% currency devaluation, we'll have chaos in this country, he's gone along and allowed them to do things like launch Jade Helm to prepare for martial law. And I simply will not go there. I mean, I survived the Northridge earthquake, and I know that the American people are so good-willed, despite our religious, national, and racial heterogeneity. We are so good-willed and so active, positive as a citizenry that we come together and help each other during periods of national trial, like a natural disaster. So that there's some economic dislocation that requires us to start bartering rather than using money, we'll do it before we'll start stealing from each other. We're a great people, and we deserve a great government. And certainly a government that prepares for national law doesn't qualify by any standard that I recognize as a great government or even a good government. It identifies a mediocre, sinister government, and this is what people are angry about. They're not angry necessarily that the government is a great conspiracy against them. They're angry that the U.S. government embodies mediocrity. And this is what we found in our focus groups and so forth. It's what I find when I interact with people during my talks. They don't feel as if the whole government is a conspiracy against them. They're just so disappointed that their intelligence has been insulted by the government not coming clean on obvious issues, like the fact that we live in a populated universe and are being visited by extraterrestrials, that we can be trusted with the information that time travel was achieved 40 years ago, 45 years ago. They're just tired of being lied to. They're tired of these valuable technologies being kept back, and they simply want a government that's as great as they are.
What about, let's go down the list of some of the basics, and thank you for hanging on, and this has been a long show.
I'm enjoying this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so am I, and that's why we're going to hang right here. Some of the basics. Taxes, what are you going to do? You're going to do a flat tax? That is one of the things that every president promises. Not a flat tax, but, the changing of taxes. They get into the White House, and then all of that goes out the window. So you have to have positions on all of the basic platforms, taxes.
Right. Well, I'm a Cambridge-educated economist. I have a master's degree in land economy and picked up some economics at Cambridge, which is one of the leading universities that basically models economic theory for its graduate students. And I'm going to sponsor an innovation in our tax code because, look, the basic dilemma that we're in regarding taxation is we're caught betwixting between the conservative doctrine that taxes should be limited to allow the economic system to solve problems without taxing people to create government programs to address such problems. This would be basically laissez-faire capitalism. Knock taxes down on everybody, including the rich, and let the economy do its wonder. That doctrine comes up against an equally estimable theory or doctrine that the government...
Oh, we lost Andy. Hang on for a second. Let me see if I can just bring him right back. Man, we're going into overtime tonight. You got to love this. Let's see what happened to Andy here. Let's just go ahead and do this. Where did he go? Let's see here. Yes, right there. Boom. Yeah, we're going into overtime tonight. If we're going to do this, let's do this. I'm totally enjoying myself. I haven't had a show quite like this in a long time. All right, let's see here.
So the problem is that our government, the U.S. government, but the Congress, is essentially at deadlock. It's actually frozen as a result of the inherent contradictions between these two estimable and reasonable doctrines. It's reasonable. Everybody knows that it's obviously going to spur greater economic productivity for the average person to be paid by a wealthy person to do a job rather than by a government bureaucrat to do nothing, right? I think we can agree on that fact. We can also agree that government exists to create public goods, including defense, by the way. That's one of the principal reasons it exists, both internally and externally. Now, that creates a dilemma as to how you tax and how much you tax. The idea that I embrace was conceived by others, but is the idea that I'm going to advance. And that is that the most appropriate place to take taxes from the citizenry and from companies, namely legal and legally speaking, both artificial and natural persons, basically corporations and individuals, is at that place in the economy where a person or a corporation withdraws money from a bank to spend that money on itself, on its company, on its person. So in other words, what I'm going to try to put before Congress is a bank withdrawal tax. I don't know the exact amount, and I have several analysts trying to calculate 3 data points. First is how much the cost of federal and state government is. We're using a time series case study of the 1980s. And then what is the volume of bank withdrawals in the country in a given year or decade? And then what would, let's say, 0.5%, a 1%, a 2.5, or a 5% bank withdrawal tax yield in government revenues? If you look at the figures that are withdrawn from banks, not just people pulling $20 out of their ready teller to buy a good dinner for themselves and their best friend, but literally $100 million investments by companies in new office buildings and things like that. The sheer volume of bank withdrawals, this includes, by the way, the entire payroll of the entire economy. Because for somebody to be paid, they usually have to be cut a paycheck, which is a withdrawal of those funds from the bank. Every debit card billing, every credit card billing is ultimately a bank withdrawal. Okay, so the bank withdrawal tax would basically tax each bank withdrawal a very small amount. But the volume of those withdrawals is so great that it would produce trillions of dollars of federal and state funding. I support that that is the sole tax that would be imposed. I'm calling it the one tax. So my tax proposal would be to eliminate all other federal and state taxes, enact the one tax, make sure that the economists have it right in terms of what percentage that bank withdrawal tax would have to be. And then we would pool that money in a large federal fisc that itself would earn interest, being trillions of dollars. Every year we would then spend it half on the federal government functions, half on the state on a per capita basis. So the big states like California would get a much larger piece of that state drawdown than, let's say, a sparsely populated state like Nebraska. So in other words, the individual citizen would benefit by how much of the drawdown from the one tax that their state would get repatriated. And that would be my solution to ending the inherent conflict basically between the conservative notion that we should limit taxes and the liberal notion that we should increase taxes to finance public goods. Because as long as we make a small withdrawal from a small taxing of every bank withdrawal, we will have the sufficient capital to fund public goods while not having the economically destabilizing and impoverishing effects that conservatives are fighting when they're fighting taxation in general. In other words, it's a smart tax. It's not a flat tax because it only taxes the individual who's internalizing the benefit of their own money, and that includes corporations, obviously.
Yeah,
and it's not discriminatory between citizenry and corporations because the corporate financing is so much larger that they'll pay a much larger part of the federal and state fisc every year. So we'll finally resolve the inherent discrimination between poor, hardworking individuals and rich, lazy corporations.
Well, okay, but there's some blowback there. And the blowback, I hate to say it, but you would have all of the unemployment created from tax preparers, the IRS. There's 100,000 people that are laid off. H&R Block. If you're going to eliminate all of that, which again, it sounds great on the surface, and it also sounds too good to be true. So what do you do with all of the unemployment that is created from the tax industry?
Unemployment came up regarding loggers having a right to their grandfather's job when we tried to save the old growth forests in Oregon. Unemployment comes up when I talk about a world linked by teleportation rather than planes, trains, and automobiles and trucks.
Yes.
Holding on to an obsolete system makes about as much sense as continuing to use a crutch after your leg has healed. There's no inherent economic reason to retain aspects of a bad system just because people have become financially dependent on that area of business practice. I mean, people who are doing tax preparation under such a system could become financial advisors. Because look, I believe that ultimately I'll be able to demonstrate with real numbers that such a tax would produce so much government revenues that we might even be able to fund individual prosperity accounts that for the first time in human history would involve everybody in our society, at least in American society, and then it might spread to the world, in the net economic system, the system that creates prosperity. That's why people are poor. People are poor not because the poor are inevitable, such as the Bible says. The Bible says the poor shall always be with you. I don't believe that. I think we should eliminate poverty. But the poor exist because they have not been internalized in the system that creates prosperity. If a poor person begs from a stockbroker, the difference is not that the poor person lacks the virtue of the stockbroker per se. He may be less competitive than a stockbroker. The reason is the stockbroker has been internalized in the net economic activity of the society. So the way we would do that is we would create as a right of citizenship some drawdown in the net revenues that would be created by the one tax. And we would literally have as a form of taxation a demonstrably provable system to end poverty. A lot of the end poverty systems in the past had basically been involved overtaxing rich people to make middle class and poor people richer. That's what Huey Long was talking about when he said every man a king. That's ultimately what Bellamy was talking about in Looking Backwards, was making everybody a serf in a new form of corporate feudalism where we would change jobs every couple of years and everybody would get a right to be company president once in their lifetime. Those systems don't work because you don't create prosperity when you take money from a wealthy or talented person and you share the wealth. You actually eliminate the incentive to become wealthy. What we need to do instead is find a scientific way to take revenues out of the economy itself in a way that is non-discriminatory and use it to create general economic upliftment. That's what I'm asserting that my plan is, and that's my answer to the tax question. If elected President of the United States, I will advance a new, bold, and revolutionary tax plan to impose a single tax called the one tax in which bank withdrawals will be taxed. And by the way, that's not all banking activity. That's not bank deposits. You don't want to tax somebody when they give money to a bank They're basically loaning it to other people when they do that. But you want to tax people, and especially corporations, when they withdraw money from where it's held in reserve in a bank to spend it on themselves or their enterprise. That's where they're being cosmically selfish in the broadest terms. I'm not saying it's wrong to spend money on yourself or your company, but when you do so, when you withdraw money from the banking system to do so, that's where you're making it unavailable to others and available to yourself or your enterprise. And that's where it should be taxed for the benefit of everybody.
And what about other controversial conspiracy-type items? Number one, would you check into chemtrails?
I have stated on Andy 2016 at Facebook, we've now got, 3,050 members. I think that'll get broader when I officially declare in the fall. It'll become a much larger number. I have stated for years now that I will declare on my first day in office, I will come before the American people and I will address chemtrails. I will either announce that I'm ending them immediately by executive order, at least the involvement of U.S. governmental airplanes in the spraying. But if I find during my investigation that day why we're doing the spraying, at a minimum, I will inform the American people as to why the chemtrails are being sprayed. I think I know why they are being sprayed. The chemtrail program was an idea by Dr. Edward Teller to a way to stem global warming by enhancing the albedo effect, which is the rate of solar reflectance against natural formations like snow, sand, and clouds. They decided to use basically chemtrails to block the sun, to maintain the relative temperatures of the Earth, to prevent new high temperatures that could result in it pitching us, paradoxically, into a new ice age. So I think the chemtrail program follows the coming global superstorm type literature that it had its origins in the climate change studies that Andrew Marshall did for the Pentagon, which were articulated so brilliantly by Art Bell and Whitley Strieber in their book, The Coming Global Superstorm, and that the chemtrail spraying is actually a geoengineering project to prevent a coming global superstorm. I think that the American people have a right to know, the people indeed of the world, that the reason that their blue skies are being destroyed, the reason that they're developing all of these respiratory allergies like I've suffered from, and related chemtrail maladies, I think they have a right to know why the chemtrail program exists. I mean, we've already had the publication on the internet of the interior of the spraying planes. Again, I'm going to challenge journalists. You've talked about the UFO cover-up. Let's talk about the chemtrail cover-up. I'm going to be challenging the Beltway journalists that cover the presidential election. What's wrong with you people? Why haven't you been reporting this? It takes some kid with a modem to show you the interiors of the spraying planes. You know, how long do you think our necks are when we're acting like ostriches, like you are? I mean, come on. You're not keeping pace with the news events of the time. What's your problem? So that's my message to the Washington, to the Beltway press corps. They haven't covered chemtrails, and everybody and his brother knows they exist. All we have to do is look up in the sky.
Right.
Okay. So I mean, again, it's that refusal to live in harmony with the foolishness of the suppression of the truth that I'm not going to cooperate with. That's why I think people find me appealing. I think it's silly to deny that there's a chemtrail spraying program. It obviously exists. You can look up and see the modified planes that are doing the spraying, that are putting out chemtrails that are thicker and more, wider and more substantial than any contrail we ever saw tracing the sky in the 60s or 70s. Come on, we're not that dumb. We remember the deep blue skies with some little sketch of a contrail from maybe a U.S. Air Force jet aircraft. And we also have seen these tankers and other jets up there putting out this garbage that's blocking the whole sky. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that obviously we're being sprayed. The chemtrails are obviously not a conspiracy theory or an urban legend. They're a covert government program that we never voted for. I'm not going to let them do it.
Wouldn't you then have to have some type of moratorium on government lawsuits? I mean, everybody in the country would end up suing the government.
Yeah, everybody with respiratory allergies, like I developed after the chemtrail program, after never having allergies or respiratory problems, except a little bout of bronchitis when I was 10. Yeah, maybe we would couple that with a moratorium on lawsuits that would cite the chemtrail spraying program as the causation of injury. Yeah, that might be reasonable.
Well, you would have to say, look, either you want, if I give you the truth, then you can't go bananas. So if you want the truth, I'll give it to you. But right now, you have to understand, you can't turn around and shoot the messenger here. I'm going to go ahead and give you the truth, but we can't get ugly here. And which I think you just addressed, but it brings me to my next question. 9/11. What would you do? Would you get into things like that? If you're going to be the truth guy, then we have the truth about 9/11. You have Sandy Hook. You have the JFK assassination. Let's start there. Would you?
I'm not so sure. Let me just address these historically. I don't think I would reopen the Warren Commission, because I've always believed that it's more important to honor the memory of President Kennedy by creating a government as proactive and brilliant from a level of law and public policy as he was, and he was trying to raise a new high standard of government. So I've always believed that, in a sense, that it's more important to fashion a U.S. government that remembers what President Kennedy was trying to achieve, rather than obsesses over 50 years later on the fact that he was assassinated. Because in point of fact, whoever we ultimately point the finger at, whether it was Lyndon Johnson or some set of mafia leaders or, a bunch of Texas oil men as described in, the Madeline Brown literature, coupled with JFK and Nixon and a couple others, the bottom line is that most of the malefactors are either dead or dying, and the veritable statement of who was involved in the killing of President Kennedy will never bring him back. He will always be frozen in time at 46 years of age after 1,064 days in office. What we can remember and what we can bring back is a government worthy of Kennedy's vision. He was a visionary, and that's why we loved him, as well as the fact that he possessed a lot of very charming personal qualities. John F. Kennedy was a visionary, and I think we can implement his vision redefined for our time. So I don't support the reopening of the investigation of his death. 9/11 is a completely different picture. The participants are still alive. We have Larry Silverstein's admission on Facebook for 3 weeks, the owner of the buildings, that it was a conspiracy to plant explosives of some kind in the building. So there's no statute of limitations on first-degree murder, and many of the victims who either lost loved ones or were injured are still alive. Beyond the 3,000 who were lost in the Twin Towers, there's still a large class of people who were directly injured. They lost their spouses, their children, their parents. And so I believe that because some of the participants have acknowledged on the public record, as Larry Silverstein did, and I know this from multiple sources, as information was up for 3 weeks on Facebook, that we need to open the investigation because the original 9/11 investigation was compromised, and it was, again, one of these anti-truth efforts that was meant to keep the truth back from the American people. So, in fact, I would, if elected president, not reopen the 9/11 investigation, but create a new commission. I would appoint perhaps Governor Jesse Ventura as its chairman, and maybe a distinguished war crimes jurist like Alfred Lambermont Weber as co-chair, maybe perhaps also Connie Fogel as a co-chair with Alfred, and a new 9/11 commission. Of course, not only has Jesse Ventura surveyed the entire Kennedy assassination literature, but remember that Alfred served Henry Gonzalez of Texas on the House Assassinations Committee and was instrumental in bringing forward the fact that it was a conspiracy, not a single gunman, although then the House Assassinations Committee got compromised politically as well. But the bottom line is I will appoint a commission of people of unparalleled integrity, intelligence, and demonstrated passion for the truth. And I think that Governor Ventura and Judge Weber represent that. And I will impanel an entirely new group of people, including technical experts, but also, former governors of states, such as Governor Ventura is, activists in the truth movement who are distinguished jurists like Alfred is, maybe some members of the public, technical experts, to examine the whole question all over again. Because the bottom line is we did not get the truth about 9/11.
What would
and we deserve it.
What would you have done different with this nuclear agreement with Iran, and would you change it once in office?
I'm going to answer by saying that it's an issue that I haven't studied, and it would be disingenuous to say that I have a thoughtful opinion by it now. I've been engrossed still in practicing law, but also in setting up my campaign. I'm completing my books. I haven't examined the Iran agreement, but I certainly think that the Kennedy doctrine of never negotiating in fear, but also never fearing to negotiate, should define our actions vis-a-vis other countries, rather than this much more brutal and superficial doctrine that it doesn't matter that we should reach cooperative agreements with even potential adversaries because we're so effective at dropping bombs on villages. I don't think international security or our supply of energy should be won by blowing the arms and legs off of little Iranian or Iraqi or Afghani children. So I'm happy to see that the Obama administration has sought a nonviolent solution to what is perceived as the nuclear threat posed by Iran. I think that's in the nature of what we should be trying to achieve. And I certainly follow Professor Dallek's opinion that one thing that we have to control for in statecraft is the fact that as a people, we are so accomplished and we so represent the diversity of the entire planet that to some extent we're behind the eight ball in terms of being worldly and understanding people from other countries. So I think we have to remind ourselves of that it's a far better course to seek bilateral agreements with potential adversaries than to believe that preemptively we should go to war against them. War should always be the last resort, not the first resort.
And North Korea, that is also a consideration for every president as he goes into office, and how he's going to deal with, communicate, not. What's your position there?
My position is if what I've learned about North Korea is true, and again, we always have to be cautious about the information we're getting, that North Korea would be a case potentially for strategic military strikes on hard military targets and of nuclear installations, because it looks like the leadership of North Korea may be trying to deliver a nuclear weapon in the western United States, and that's something we should be seriously concerned about. I don't think that's necessarily true of Iran. But again, I would rather achieve it through negotiation than military action. But I want your listeners to know that I'm not opposed to the preemptive use of military force if it's a situation where we can't control a rogue nation's attack on us with nuclear weapons. I think in that case, it's obviously a case of trying to control damage to civilians, deaths and injuries among civilians, but that North Korea might present that special case where we would have to act preemptively to take out their launch facilities and their nuclear weapons on the ground.
Legalization of drugs.
Well, I don't support the legalization of narcotics generally. I certainly believe in the use of a physician's prescriptions for all the dispensing of all synthetic inorganic drugs, but I completely favor the unconditional legalization of marijuana. I find it, in a sense, to a free people that an herb that President Washington regularly smoked should be illegal, and that people should be doing 5 and 10 and 15 and 20-year prison sentences in the hellholes that are our state and federal prisons as a result of selling other Americans an herb that the father of our country regularly imbibed in. I will fight for the complete decriminalization of marijuana, even though my own marijuana use was limited in high school. I smoked a couple joints and didn't like it. And I have very sensitive lungs from my bronchitis in childhood, so I've never been a pot smoker. But I do defend the right of fellow Americans to be pot smokers, and I think it's offensive that that marijuana is illegal, and I will end it. We should also, by the way, tax it. Every time there's a bank withdrawal for somebody to increase their grow, why would we be making money from it? So,
yeah, we could answer a lot of problems with the legalization and taxation of marijuana. Oh my goodness!
Well, and also the I think we should have the unlicensed sale in pharmacies or in drugstores, an over-the-counter sale of cannabis oil, because it's one of the most effective painkillers on the planet, and it produces a body high, not a mental high, and it's a natural substance. Why are people going to the doctor to get a prescription for some synthetic inorganic compound like Neurontin, which may damage the chemical environment of the synapses in their brain, when in fact they could be taking a tiny little titrate of cannabis oil every morning and having a body high from it rather than pain? I think we're really harming people by not legalizing cannabis, and I completely support its legalization.
One thing that bothers me, since we're on the medical issue, and we're going to thank you. This is great. We might as well just do this last 20 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. And again, thank you so much.
Cool. You got it.
Is one of the things that bothers me, and it doesn't make sense, is when I look at this phenomenon that has been occurring over the last decade or so or longer, is prescription medications being advertised on television. To me, it's an oxymoron. It doesn't make any sense. You're advertising to people that don't even know what they're looking at. You're suggesting symptoms, and then I guess you're instructing the populace to turn around in the hopes of advertising and marketing, that you're going to go back to your doctor and go, hey, what about this drug? Shouldn't the pharmaceutical industry just be advertising their products to doctors in professional publications and using their pharmaceutical reps to go out and instruct doctors out there about new medications that are out? Some of them do serve a purpose, but I think it's completely wrong for the pharmaceutical industry to be advertising prescription drugs when we don't even know what they are, and you're suggesting symptoms out there that you're asking the populace to examine themselves and to come up with a diagnosis, and then to turn around and go to your doctor. What do you think about that? Would you change that?
I've never thought about that specific issue of advertising prescription drugs on television. But I agree with your major premise and all the minor premises that support it. It's essentially an oxymoron because the doctors are the prescribers.
Right.
So why are you creating a market of dependency, a culture of dependency, so that the patients are going to the physicians and saying, should I be on this? Again, if they're the dispenser and they're making an ethical medical decision to prescribe a synthetic inorganic compound, but the member of the general public has no understanding of the chemistry or the biology of the use of that drug. I agree with that premise. I also agree with the premise that we shouldn't be creating a culture of drug dependency, because in fact, the synthetic inorganic approach should be the last resort. We should be prescribing herbal and other approaches that are natural before we place people on synthetic inorganic compounds, which have terrible side effects, which are often toxic. I always find it kind of sort of hilarious in the level of dark humor that some of them suggest that one of the side effects is death.
Yeah, right. Suicide, yes.
They do that, I think, to avoid liability. Oh, yeah, great. I'm going to get rid of my migraine headaches by possibly dying. So I don't have migraines, but I'm just using it as an example. But it's so interesting. I agree with your basic premise that if we're not going to have cigarette smoking because we don't want to create a culture of tobacco dependency, the same logic holds for a culture of drug dependency. And so I agree with your idea, and I would support advancing that as president.
Yeah, whenever I see a commercial and it's just like, okay, side effects are itchy skin and suicidal dreams. It's like, what? Say what?
Yeah,
And
I'll take the cannabis long before I'll go there, right?
Yeah.
I'm kind of anti-drug. I like to tell people I've survived. I've gotten to age 53 utilizing basically an Ace comb and an Oral-B toothbrush. I'm kind of a rough nature in terms of my parsimonious behavior towards pampering myself with, hair dryers, electric hair dryers, and taking, running to my doctor to take medication. I've taken very few drugs in my life after being prescribed them by physicians.
Yes, and I will say this, Andrew and I, when we were hanging out last month, he walked away from me when the subject of cigarettes came up. He was like, "Dude, I can't even don't even stand next to me." It was I was like,
I'm a purist in terms of oxygen supply.
It was really funny. I was like, "Dude, I'll stand downwind." Well, it doesn't matter. I'm going this way.
Yeah, I am a non-smoker. I've never smoked. My lungs are too sensitive. I've done a couple joints, a couple puffs on a marijuana, on a bomb. I think I tried one line of cocaine. I'm just not somebody who likes drugs, so I don't have any issues regarding drug dependency. I try to treat myself with organic foods and attitudinal shifts and just music and stuff when I get sick. I actually avoid going on antibiotics because I always say to people, well, those are the big cannons I want to keep in reserve. And they say, what do you mean reserve? And I say, like when I get tuberculosis.
Yeah, when I need it.
I don't want to, I'm able to cough this up myself, okay? I don't need to drug it out of my body, so I'm very, very parsimonious about, I've done very few or very little of recreational drug taking, but I've also avoided prescription drug taking because the bottom line is, a lot of the metabolites of that stuff ends up in your liver and has to be voided with a liver cleanse, and a lot of it stays around for years. And I learned that at a fairly young age, and I've been pretty much of an abstainer even from prescription drug taking. I'm proud to say.
Now, GMOs, and now that it certainly seems to have, it's come to a line in the sand. And when you're looking at fast food restaurants changing their aspect of GMOs and general foods and all of this artificial ingredient, fight. There's a fight back on it now, and it seems to be working because of it comes down to money when fast food restaurants are suggesting that's it. We're going to end this now because they've seen the decline in money and they have to make a change. What's your position on things like Monsanto and GMOs? I've been on the record for public record for several years now as stating that if I'm elected president of the United States in 2016, I will fight for an international ban on genetically modified organisms. I believe the reason that we should prevent their production is that they mutilate the natural genome of the planet out of their proper natural state. And I think that that's something that we don't want to give a corporation the power to do. We don't want to allow the Monsantos of the world to privatize the fertility of seeds and require us to be dependent on them for our seed production. But I don't think we want to allow them to be involved in the mutilation of life as we know it, as my mentor Norman Cousins once put it, when he was chairing an appearance by the geneticist Paul Berg of Stanford, actually a Nobel laureate, at the Wadsworth VA Center one night in the early 1980s. Norman got very angry with a member of the public and said, look, I'm just giving my opinion here, and I believe this kind of genetic modification is mutilating the natural genome out of its original condition. And so Norman raised the alarm about the genetically modified organisms 25, 30 years ago. He was ahead of his time in a lot of this stuff. You go back and read Norman's editorial for the Saturday Review, he was talking about this stuff in the 70s. The threat posed by genetically modifying organisms. So I would actually fight for an international moratorium. And if that hurts Monsanto, then tough darts. They should have been involved in agricultural productivity rather than genetic modification. How are you going to fund your campaign? Now, we're talking about a lot of money here, and it's something that you have to think about every single day. You can't do it without money.
Well, in order to fund a campaign, one of the first things you have to do is create a website, and you have to file with the federal government. Because if you don't have a website presence and you haven't filed, you're not taken seriously. I believe that will happen when I do both of those things. Primarily, I'm going to be taking a modern approach, a contemporary approach of delivering content through YouTube. Because look, if I give a great speech in Mobile, Alabama, or Topeka, Kansas, or Bellingham, Washington, and it reaches a room full of 200 people, it simply can be great politics, but it's not going to have the effect of just appearing before the camera and sharing my ideas with the American people over YouTube. So I'm going to lead a very heavily YouTube-dependent outreach during the campaign for that year of November 2015 to 16, and make a case with the American people as to why they should vote for me. I don't have the money to even get ballot access, so we're going to be identifying what states allow for a write-in, and then we will go for the creation of at least one elector in the states that don't permit a write-in vote. And I also recognize that I'm playing the long game here. What I'm trying to do is bring integrity back into the American presidential politics. And so I don't know how to describe this. I'm not becoming overwrought that I have to become president in 2016. Maybe it's Hillary's turn. Maybe it's, Rand Paul's turn. But I know from what I was told by my father and Courtney Hunt that I ultimately reached the White House. So that may involve accepting the vice presidential slot from somebody, and then I succeed to the sitting president. I don't know those details. And by the way, I wasn't told by anybody in government that I become president as a result of running in 2016. I was simply told that I was a future president, and that's all I was told. I wasn't told whether I reach it through direct election or as a vice president or lesser cabinet official succeeding the president. I wasn't given any of the details. I was simply said, get ready, prepare yourself because you're a future president.
So you're going to monetize the YouTube videos, or are you going to ask for donations, or both through YouTube?
I'm going to share policy and then ask for a donation by referring the viewer to both my website and my PayPal address, and my address to send donations physically in the form of a check or what have you. And then the website will also have the credit card capability. But my point here is, we found out in the conference business, when I wanted to get the truth out about time travel, that it was more effective to do a teleconference from home with 300 people around the world on one of the services that allows you to do that than to get 30 people or 300 people to a physical location. Because even if you got the same number of people who were attending the teleconference, they all contributed to global warming on the way there. Right? Why burn dead dinosaurs to get people to physical locations when we can all be linked with other conferring parties, other attendees to a public event wherever we are on the planet? So I'm definitely going to utilize the instrumentalities of the internet to wage my campaign. Sure, I'll do some public appearances. I'm sure that I will do an announcement speech publicly, and I will travel around the country giving speeches occasionally. But I'm not going to do a barnstormer. We had originally considered 200 cities, in 2016. There's no purpose in doing that because that gets less coverage than even filming something for YouTube. So why put myself in that local place when the global place is available online? I have to use YouTube. It's inevitable.
Yeah, totally. One last question before we wrap this up. Racism in America right now seems to be well, I would say this. It's covered more in the mass media than maybe what reality is. But what's your position there?
My position is that I don't believe fundamentally we're any longer a racist country. We're the only country, for example, that has enacted any doctrine, anything like the doctrine of affirmative action. We also fought a civil war that was incredibly damaging to the country, in which predominantly Caucasian men fought to both save the Union and also to end slavery. Because in fact, this has been somewhat disguised from us. The reason the Civil War broke out is because the abolitionist candidate won the election. Lincoln was no longer a fence sitter on slavery when he was elected. All you have to do is go to the campaign song by the Hutchinson Singers of New Hampshire, the Granite State, who were vaunted abolitionists, to see, which Lincoln selected as his campaign song, to see the fact that when he ran in 1860, he ran as the abolitionist candidate, the candidate who was pledged to end slavery, even if it meant imposing an end to slavery on the southern states where slavery still existed. So I believe that in the 100 years between then and the 1960s, we were addressing our racism both at the level of popular sentiment and law creation. Now that 50 more years have passed, I don't believe that we're a fundamentally racist country, but we're a country where the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, and institutionalized racism still affects a particular part of our society, and that is African American men between 18 and 35 years of age. They are disproportionately jailed. They are disproportionately not educated at the high school and college level. They are disproportionately dying before they reach maturity. They are disproportionately dying from diseases that could be prevented, from violence, and especially they are disproportionately represented among victims of the improper use, the excessive use of police violence. So we have a police violence problem that isn't contained within the African American population, nor indeed within the male African American population. It's a problem for the whole country that we're going to have to address. We're going to have to address the fact that a police officer is supposed to use his handgun as a last resort, not as a first resort. We also have to examine the way policing is occurring, both generally within the society and specifically within predominantly African American inner city neighborhoods, that's creating a situation where a young African American male is about 4 times more likely than he should be on a per capita basis to die as a result of police violence. So I think we have a measure of institutionalized racism embedded in the larger problem of police violence. And it's very difficult and intractable. But what we can say is that if we're really going to end the Civil War, it's not just going to be a matter of symbolically convincing South Carolina and maybe some of the other southern states to no longer fly the Confederate flag, which was in fact the battle flag of the Confederate Army. Its 13 stars represent the 13 states that broke away from the Union and became the Confederacy. They don't represent the 13 original colonies, as some people have suggested. So the Confederate flag is somewhat of an historical offense to what the country achieved in the Civil War, which was the saving of the Union and the ending of slavery. But if we're to truly end the negative effects of slavery, of Jim Crow, and of institutionalized racism, I believe we need to take a larger per capita share of those federal revenues from I-1 tax, and we need to invest in education and in job creation among African Americans, particularly African American males. When I discuss this issue with African Americans, I say if greater federal spending was provided to African Americans to have the same level of economic attainment as whites and Hispanics and Asians, what kinds of things would you like to see? And I often get surprising answers. Like one woman said, a black woman from Los Angeles said, how about how to write a resume? Nobody in the black community knows how you apply for a job and create a resume about what you've done. It's an area, it's like a cultural blind spot that we're not taught in school or in high school or college. So what we need to do is we need to spend more on the economic upliftment of young black men. We have to do it. We have an historical duty to do it. That's my position. And that may seem very liberal to some people, but look at the history of the country. We have a duty to do it. So that would be something that I would earmark as a significant domestic issue, is the fact that there are more black men in prison or on probation or parole than in college in any given year. That is an historical disgrace. And we need to end it by investing in the economic upliftment of the African American community. I just want to close out on this. I was going to minor in African American relations, but I ended up at UCLA, but I ended up minoring in Latin American history. But I did learn something about the history of African Americans. And one thing I would point out is the whole emphasis by the mainstream culture in terms of dealing with the African American culture has focused on the civil rights tradition of individuals like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and it's ignored the economic rights and the prosperity rights position of black leaders like Marcus Garvey. And I think that's what we need to recapture. We need to say, look, we need to spend dollars to make African Americans as successful as other Americans on a per capita basis. If that means spending more on predominantly black schools in the inner city, we have to do it. If it means eliminating from prison all nonviolent drug offenders to include people who have been involved in crimes of survival, like drug trafficking in the inner city, we need to release all of the nonviolent drug offenders from prison. By the way, I see that President Obama is starting to do that, as I've long been saying that we should. So if he's borrowing from me, he's being ethical in a way that Ted Cruz isn't being ethical by stealing my motto. But I really believe we need to spend dollars and focus on the fact that we are not really realizing the victory that we achieved in the Civil War, as long as there's this gross disparity between economic and professional attainment by blacks, and as long as more black men are being killed by the police than are numerically represented in society, and in prison than they are numerically represented in society. These are national disgraces that we should address because we're a good people.
Thank you so much, Andy. An amazing show tonight. I want you to be safe in your travels out there. And as always, my friend, great show. Thank you so much. Thank you for hanging for
Thank you, Jimmy.
An extra hour. Andrew Basiago, 2016. Thank you, Andrew.
You got it.
You have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Race Hobbs. Thank you, KGRA, for letting us hanging for the extra hour. Thank you, Fadernauts. Was that just an absolute phenomenal show? An extra hour. I just can't say enough. Andrew Basiago, smart man. Thank you, Andy. Faded Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Shows produced by Hilton J. Palm, Mark D. Kovar, LJ3, Renee, Mark Dunbar, and Jonas. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, Mark D. Kovar. Faded by Dale. Webmaster is Method of Signaling. Music, Doug Aldridge. Intros, Spaceboy, SpaceboyMusic.com. Faded Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA The Planet. Tomorrow night is Fader Nights. Rock and Rule Trivia. Follows on Twitter at JChurchRadio. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Everybody be safe. See ya.